But in the rest of this hour, we're joined by g-edward-griffin. G-Edward-Griffin is an American filmmaker, producer, author, and political lecturer. He then began his career producing documentaries and books and has often debated topics like cancer, the Federal Reserve, and the libertarian views of the U.S. Supreme Court, terrorism, subversion, foreign policy. He's the best-selling author of The Creature from Jekyll Island. And, of course, he also started Freedom Force International, about taking control of our local state governments, the long view of history. We need the shock troops to be out there waking folks up and taking action, but also just plodding forward every square inch of territory we take back from the globalists. But on short notice, I asked Jaron to get him on today just to pop in because we need to be praying for Ron Paul. I mean, that's my view. He says he wants an audit of not just the Federal Reserve, and he's gotten very close to that and exposed that they're hiding something. But he also wants them to audit the New York Fed's gold vaults, a lot of secrecy there, and Fort Knox. We know there's been a lot of hanky-panky there and the gold confiscations of 33 and it being shipped overseas. And they've been very secretive about this. So you talk about a stroke of genius to really expose the bankers. Demand that audit that they've always fought and say, why can't we see the people's gold? And, of course, they'll try to have a staged audit or something. But the point is, this is very exciting. And also, where he sees gold going, where he sees the awakening going. I just mentioned this with Ted Anderson. Investors spooked as glitch sends gold to $3,400 an ounce yesterday. I mean, you've got Bloomberg reporting that most of the futures for the month of December, the most popular future is $1,500 an ounce. So you've got that going on. So an expert on gold, the free market, the Federal Reserve, all of it. G-Edward-Griffin, good to have you here with us.
Well, thanks, Alex. Good to be back.
So much going on. What do you want to tackle first of the subjects I raised?
I don't know. I was just overwhelmed by the whole list, thinking, what can I say that you probably haven't already said 10 times over? I certainly agree that we need to pray for Ron Paul. I mean, this fellow's got more courage in his little fingernail than most people have in their whole body. I mean, here's a fellow that's not only doing all the things you mentioned, but calling for getting rid of the CIA. Now, that takes some courage, I would say. So, yeah. But more than prayer, I think Ron Paul needs some support, some good, strong mass action support and some political support and probably financial support. Who doesn't need that? But more to the issues, Alex, I think that the calling for an audit of the gold supply is a brilliant maneuver. I think Congressman Paul knows as well as you and I that there is no gold of any substance or any quantity in Fort Knox. Otherwise, they would have displayed it long ago. They've got some soldiers, I understand, guarding the gates around Fort Knox, and you can't get into it. It makes it look like they're guarding something. But
and congressmen over the decades, as you know, and people can pull up these cases, have wanted to go look at it, and they're told no, no, no. I mean, you talk about brazen, how this is just right out in the open.
Yeah, right out in the open. And, you know, it's amazing to me how people like our neighbors down the street, you can tell them about this, and they'll look at you and say, well, yeah, that's interesting. They don't get it, you know. They don't understand how these things really impact their own personal lives, their own future, their own security, their own freedom. And yet, I mean, this is serious. This is a heart attack. What does the government have to back up its economic power? Is it just military? Is that the only reason that people accept American dollars? Is because if they don't, they're going to be bombed? Or because the police are going to come and put them in prison?
But it also reveals how this shadow government confiscated the gold in 33, publicly shipped most of it to Europe, increased the price a year later, enriched themselves. We had all these national gold reserves. We were partially gold-backed. And now, for what is it, 60 years, no one can look at it, but they just say, don't worry, it's there, and then act very suspicious. You know the swindlers have run out the back door with it. They may wheel in a small portion of it or something if we do force an audit, but it illustrates how they just operate in total secrecy.
Yeah, and they really become less and less concerned about what the public thinks, you know. The public be damned. They're just going to do it anyway. And it kind of reminds me, as you were just saying that, Alex, remember during the the historic period in America where in the days where the frontier was rapidly expanding, they had what they called wildcat banks, because there were banks opening up in territories where they didn't have too many people, but they had lots of wildcats, and they called them wildcat banks. And there was a time in those days when banks were being exposed as being fraudulent, because people would come in and demand their money and their gold, and in those days money was gold. And what the banks would do is they'd put the out there in the lobby where people could see it, and they had guards there. They'd put kegs of nails out there, and they'd cover the tops of the kegs with about 2 or 3 inches of gold coins. And the people come in and say, "Oh, they got a whole keg full of gold coins," And so, everything's fine. They'd go back and they continue to accept the bank's paper notes. I have a feeling that if they ever get around to the audit of the gold at Fort Knox, we're probably going to see a lot of kegs of nails in there with maybe some bars of gold on top.
Well, that's another good point. And g-Edward-Griffin, you talk about Ron Paul's courage. I mean, I'm not just here going, "Oh, Ron Paul's so great. Oh, he's so wonderful." I say this about very few people. He gets up and gives speeches on television now saying the CIA has had a coup. They're bringing in the drugs. We need to abolish them. I mean, that gets people killed routinely. I mean, these people kill foreign leaders, run the drugs, the white slaves, everything. He's saying abolish the private Federal Reserve, audit Fort Knox and the New York Fed's gold. I mean, these are swindler, criminal, murdering mafia who launch global wars, who are eugenicists. And I just hope people realize that Ron Paul, just quietly, with dignity, is literally a George Washington-type character. Doesn't mean he's perfect, but let me tell you, he's for real. And that's why Cass Sunstein and others have come out and admitted, now we have this from the mainstream British news, same paradigm there, posing as patriots. They say they're coming out posing as anti-New World Order people to attack real activists. And that's why we see g-Edward-Griffin being attacked, Ron Paul, myself, and others, because we're real. So that's the attack from below. And you're an expert on subversion for more than 50 years. I want you to talk about that from the congressional hearings, how they do this. They're attacking us from the activist level because they think that has credibility because the mainstream media is discredited. But they're also sending in Sarah-Palin and Glenn-Beck to literally mimic what I'm doing and what others are doing to try to co-opt the Tea Party movement that Ron Paul and others were the progenitors of. Can you speak to that?
Well, somewhat, yes, because over the years I have studied how these people work, and I do know pretty much there's a strategy that has worked repeatedly over decades. And if they have opposition, such as we're just talking about here, whether it's Ron Paul or you or me or some little guy coming along just speaking up in his local community, they know exactly how to deal with them, and there are certain steps. The first one is to ignore the opposition, because usually it'll go away on its own. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to attack it or anything. Just ignore it. Most people speaking out against this collectivist empire, the evil empire, they have no funding, they have no following, they have no way to communicate their ideas, so they may make a little splash here and there, and then they just sort of wither away. You never hear from them again. So the first step is to ignore them. Now, if that doesn't work, then they decide to discredit them. They'll use their media power to a great extent to demonize people, to make the average person consider that they're doing something illegal or something immoral, or that they're wacko or something like that. Just demonize them to peel off their support, so they no longer have this financial support, this following, or this means of communication. Now, if that doesn't work, and almost always that works, but the few that make it through that barrier, then the next step is to buy them off, to entice them with offers of employment or financial support. Sometimes these people don't even know they're being bought off. I've seen a couple of efforts in my life where people have had great wealth, and they have set up boards of directors, and they've accepted money from compatriots and said, "Look, I'll put $1 million into your program. I'll add to your money, and you need more money. I like what you're doing." And then first thing you know, they say, "Well, how about being on your board of directors?" Well, sure, you just gave us $5 million. That entitles you to be on the board. Then somebody else comes along and they're on the board of directors. And I've seen this happen where after about 6 or 8 years, all of a sudden the organization is completely dominated by the very people that they started off to oppose. And sometimes they'll just buy people off. They'll say, look, we'll get you a nice villa, we'll get you a yacht, and you just go down to the Caribbean someplace and enjoy life and just get out of the way. And then if that doesn't work, finally they can bring in the jackals and they can start to play rough. They can arrange a suicide or something like that. This is a very known, structured plan. It has always worked in the past. And anybody like Ron Paul or you, Alex, who stands up against these people, we know that that's what we're facing. And it's just, some people say, well, why do you do that? Aren't you afraid? Well, hell yes, I'm afraid, but that doesn't mean you stop. You know, I think every man that's ever gone into battle, fighting for his country, has been afraid. There's nothing wrong with being afraid, but you don't stop just because you're afraid. And that's one of the reasons I salute Ron Paul.
Well, I mean, when you really study the globalist plan, they're not going to give us any quarter. They're not going to just domesticate us. And, of course, that's something I'd fight to the death to resist. This is a scientific tyranny, and I can't look at my children, g-edward-griffin, and not want to fight against tyranny with everything I've got, or other people's children. I mean, liberty and freedom and being a free human is all that there is, and I've gone way past being afraid. I'm afraid of them killing me so I can't finish my work. I'm afraid of being worldly and stumbling or being manipulated or them setting something up to look like I sold out. I mean, because this is a devilish world, and the system sets a lot of pitfalls. But the sickest thing is seeing my work, terms I've coined, things I've done, taken and kind of twisted by Glenn-Beck, Sarah-Palin, to know from high-up people in Fox News who are patriots that Glenn-Beck does tell other big radio shows that are involved with Fox News or Clear Channel, don't have Alex Jones on, and that he does have a team of people taking what I say and do and then twisting it. What's your view of Glenn-Beck and Sarah-Palin? Because now she's going to Iowa. It looks like she's going to run for president, and some pretty high-powered Hollywood insiders that we've been talking to say that the establishment wanted to energize the left-right paradigm with Obama, get a bunch of the agenda through, and that they are planning to try to put Palin in. What's your view on that?
Well, I don't have any inside information, but to me, just looking at the outside, these people fit the model perfectly of controlled opposition. We know that the opposition has always tried, our opposition has always tried to control their own opposition, whether it be left or right. This has always been a favorite tactic. And it usually works. I think in terms of when the Federal Reserve System was created, a little example of that, little microcosmic example, the very people who were astride the banking system, the great financial powers that were supposed to be controlled by the Federal Reserve Act, are the ones that wrote the Federal Reserve Act. So that was bad enough, but then having written it and during the debate period before it was passed by Congress, these very people then went to the press and began giving statements and speeches condemning their own act and saying, this is bad for America, this is going to be bad for business, so that people would say, oh, yeah, these bankers, they don't like this bill very much. It must be pretty good. These people are masters at manipulation. They're psychopoliticians, and this has been going on for almost for the very beginning, well, at least since the Woodrow Wilson administration. So, yeah, we know what's going on today, so who are the ones? Well, you look around and it's pretty obvious. I agree with you, Alex, that Glenn-Beck and Sarah-Palin fit that pattern pretty well. But all you need to do, and if you're a skeptic, or let's say a cynic like I am, an informed one, you know what the political party system is. The two-party system is completely controlled by the international globalists. They're both the same. And so why would you think that anybody that has the blessing of the Republican Party would be, able to break rid of that, or out of it? It's impossible.